So thanks for the big crowd coming here today. I'm amazed, but it's also the last session today. Highly appreciated that you made it. And you can, of course, relax a little bit here, and then we have some meaningful content. Today is about the state of industrial remote access, which is a study Secomea did. And for those who don't know Secomea, we are 18 years in the business doing secure remote access. And we do a yearly study with our customer base, but also non-customers in the industry to collect the latest trends. And I spent quite some time to share some findings from that. If you are really interested, there's a little flyer there with a QR code where you can also download the full report. So in case this wasn't enough, there's more to dig in. Good. We did this big study, and it's really about getting a little bit deeper into how is secure remote access used across the industry, and try to identify the clusters which gives us a certain direction and where we are heading. And when we go into the split of the data, so we had 400 individuals or 400 companies participation. Most of it is in the US and in Europe, each 40%. And then we have a larger part in APAC and rest of the world. I think probably was someone from New Zealand, but I don't think too many. The other thing is it was 70% on manufacturing and 30% on critical infrastructure. So critical infrastructure usually is more into energy grids and water pumps and these kind of things. Yeah? But the core was on operational technology in manufacturing. Within that space, we have brought it down to decision makers. So 1/4 on C-suite, 1/4 on OT and engineering leaders, so people responsible for the solutions. Then we had mostly on the IT side, the practitioners. So this means cybersecurity specialists, SOC operators, analysts, and these kind of IT specialists. And then we also looked into the compliance and risk professionals. So people who own the compliance part, NIS2, CRA, or whatever applies for you. And then, of course, the OT side. So people who at the end just want to keep the factory up and running and operate and don't care about the rest. So we ask questions about session visibility. So when we talk about sessions, we talk about external vendors having access into the factory floor to maintain certain systems, to do predictive maintenance, but also to react on incidents happening. And we ask about the auditability of these sessions from vendors. We ask about how do you deal with credentials to access all these systems? What governance models do you have in place? And also, do you have implemented a zero trust approach? And then, of course, the main part is incident exposure. So did something go wrong or not? Yeah. So that's, of course, the key question from an outcome perspective. So we didn't look into frameworks. It was really about the reality of what is happening on a daily basis. So what we thought, what we will find is that with the recent regulation, there's a increased pressure to improve and change. Yeah? We also saw the last years a lot of buzz around zero trust implementation. So we were also expecting quite some advancement on that side. And also from the market trend, we thought there must be a lot of consolidation in terms of OT remote access tools. But actually what we found out that most people were quite confident, but actually had no evidence for that, yeah? Which is, I think, a quite interesting finding. It's not a very German attitude. It's usually the other side around here in Germany, but in our global report, it was definitely quite some confidence, but no evidence. Good. And we're getting even more people here. Welcome. Can you hear me? Awesome. You haven't missed anything exciting. We're just about to get started. So what we found was actually that 3 out of 4 OT leaders believe they have a full or good control, but actually half of the participants couldn't even see what's going on. And this is, for me, the biggest finding. When 75% believe they have really good control. How can you control something you can't see? So this is, let's say, the root cause where we thought we'd dig in a little bit. We have some issues there. Okay, you should hear me now. No? You get some support over there. All right, you hear me now? Perfect, welcome. Good, so let's start with IT-OT convergence, which is main theme since many years. No trade show you can visit without a session on IT-OT convergence. So first question we ask is, who's actually owning remote access in the company? And this is the first interesting part. Yeah, so it was 17% IT, 13% OT, and in most cases 70%. It is a shared responsibility of IT and OT. So as you just described it on your side, so quite good. But also still surprisingly big number, I would say, for such a key functionality. So more than 1% just outsourced it and no one was responsible. So they just gave it to an external entity. Said, hey, you take care. Here's an SOW. Do it. But yeah, so pretty cool, quite advanced, end-to-end IT, OT, owning it in 70% of the cases. But of course, there's always an issue when you have shared responsibility. So I think everyone teams up, but in the details, it is a little bit more difficult. Yeah? And this is also something we can see. When we ask questions about the alignment between IT and OT, you can see that only 27% are aligned on the security priorities. So, but of course, it's a key initiative and a key functionality. So to see that only 1/3 is, or less than 1/3 is aligned, is a little bit surprising. But also you see that still a larger portion is not aligned at all on the priorities. So yes, shared responsibility, but with very different priorities. And so we luckily also ask why they are not aligned. And this is quite interesting. So when you then go in there, so 75% were happy. Yeah, IT, OT, we're best friends, no friction. But 40% said, yeah, we have a lack of shared visibility. So while they had the shared responsibility, at least 40% couldn't see what's going on. Yeah, so quite difficult. Then compliance interpretation is the biggest one. So at the end, you want to be compliant, you want to control things, you want to audit things. But in reality, most of the companies, or nearly half, have a problem in the interpretation between the different teams being responsible. Yeah? And this goes on then in the conflicting priorities. So how do we prioritize the IT security, the governance perspective, versus the factory floor uptime, which is the classic where everyone in OT explains, yeah, OT is uptime is our time, yeah, that's the most important thing. Yeah, and IT, yeah, there's a patch, please reboot. It's the classic conflict, and we still see it here. It's everywhere, yeah? It's not solved. So this is still a very common thing and is causing a lot of friction. Ownership of tools was the other one where we see 38% actually have a conflict there and are not happy in their shared responsibility. So what we more or less can say that, yes, shared ownership, but actually it doesn't mean that control is shared yet. Yeah? But it's on the way and we see it from the train. Good. Then we went into another interesting part, which is the fragmentation of access. So what kind of access, what kind of tools do you have in place to access? And there we ask about the number of tools. And this is not surprising, but it's still a larger part. So nearly 50% have 4 or more tools in place for external remote access into their environment. Going back to our initial question about centralized control, you can imagine quite some tool sprawl brings quite some visibility and control problems with this. Yeah. On the other hand, only 9.5% have consolidated onto one tool for external remote access. Quite surprising to see how many people are still fighting to consolidate that and get the visibility in there. Yeah, because in theory, it's a relatively simple exercise. Just select one tool and you consolidate on it. In reality, you have multiple tools already. You have a lot of legacy. You have acquisitions. So we are not even done with the current consolidation project. Someone buys the competitor. You have another 5 tools. Yeah, so this is an ongoing challenge. And you see it's everywhere. We then looked into what kind of different tools do we have in place for O2 remote access. And there you see that half of the people have a dedicated solution for SRA in the OT environment, but around 3/4 are using tools provided by their vendors. Yeah? So they have no saying in these tools. So they are provided by the third party and they are just using them. So this is a reality. 75% are using tools provided by third parties and not tools they have chosen or they control. We also see classic IT-based solutions, PAM solutions. Also 2/3 of the companies have them in place. And then VPN, which is technically not even a remote access solution, but it's bridging networks misused for secure remote access. Yeah? And you see also 60% of the companies have this still in place somewhere. So it is a very fragmented place. And this, of course, brings us to the real question. So how long do you need to give an external entity access to your systems? Yeah? So how long does it take to get them into the machine to give you the help? And only a very small portion can get support in minutes. Yeah? Factory floor is down. You need help from the vendor. 7.5% only. Yeah? 60% within a few hours, we can get our help into the systems to debug, to analyze. But 30% still need days to get external help. So for those, getting into the car and driving somewhere for support is actually still the faster option. Yeah. And that despite the reality that everyone had multiple tools. So I think that's also quite surprising to see. Of course, we wanted to understand, does it correlate with the tools you have in place? Yeah? And you can see that the ones needing minutes and hours on the dedicated platforms, most of them are faster, but also the difference is not that big. Yeah, you see that at the end, the tools itself is not what drives it most. Yeah, so it must be something else from a speed perspective. Yeah, but what we can clearly say is that the fragmentation increases the complexity and creates inconsistencies from an operational perspective. And this is actually where then regulation comes in, because regulation helps you to get things into processes, to get things organized. So it is something we also looked into, and there we looked into 6 verticals. So we looked into manufacturing, infrastructure, into pharma, oil and gas, food and beverage, and automotive, because all of them have in their verticals their own additional regulations and specifications. And then we just compared the different factors we asked for. So we looked into the visibility, the auditability, but also the advancement in the zero trust score. How good are they in their credential hygiene? And then as the ultimate result, what is your incident rate? Yeah. So, and when we stay in the first row for manufacturing, so 37% of the interviewed manufacturers had an incident last year. Yeah? But they also have a relatively low session visibility. When we go into critical infrastructure, which is way more regulated, with a NIS2 and also all this NIS2 discussions right now, who's critical infrastructure or not, they have always been critical infrastructure. Nothing changes for them. So they had that pressure already. So, and this is something you see. So they have way more visibility in what's going on. They also have way better score here on the vendor audit. They are more advanced on the zero trust side. And at the end, you see also that they have the lowest incident rate. Yeah. So it seems to be that progress on the regulated environments drives the reduction of incidents. Yeah, so this is clearly something you can see here. And that's, I think, at the end, good news, because at the end, if regulation drives a higher security, that the current efforts done all over the world, in the US, here in Europe, by the European Union, will have a positive impact on resilience and lower rate of incidents. Good. So, but we've seen earlier, somehow it breaks. Yeah, we have seen confident quite good, but in the reality, things don't work as expected. And this is actually quite funny, because when you break it down a little bit more, like from our personas, how do they rate it independently? You can actually see that those who have to pay and fund it, and those who do it, trust the least. Yeah. So only the users are quite confident that there's a good system in place and things run smooth. Yeah. But those who are a little bit deeper in how much they are paying and what the regulation actually asks for are having a little bit more concerns. It's still relatively positive. We ask from 1 to 5. Yeah. So 4 is still a strong vote. Yeah. So I would argue a little bit less would be also nice, but it's about the larger group of people here, still a meaningful difference. And of course, this is something which makes sense. Yeah, when we go in there into the visibility of what happened when an external entity had access, you can see that only 43%, so that's the lower part here, they can see what happened in their system when someone external had access. Yeah, so the larger part doesn't know what happened. They can probably see someone had access, but they can't see what have they done. Yeah? So, and especially when we are talking about misuse, but also stolen credentials, this is a big issue, because you don't know if they did something good or something bad. You just know, okay, that account was in my system, but what they have done is nothing you can answer. Yeah, so it's a key challenge we can see here just by the data. And then we can actually correlate that with a number of incidents. We have the visibility. When you have no visibility, you always have incidents. So incident, yes, is the gray here, 100% of them had incidents. And you can actually see the more visibility you have, the lower is the chance that you will have an incident. So those who have the systems to see something run way better than those who don't see what's going on. Defender's perspective, nothing by this changes, but of course this means that your organization is aware of what's going to happen, that's able to defend your systems and to log out and to take measures because you see what's going on. So big impact from that perspective. Yeah? The other thing is what we see here on the number of incidents. The more external vendors accessing your systems you have, the more goes the likelihood up that something happens. Yeah, which also makes sense. The complexity, the number of data increases. But what we also see is for those who have more than 100 external entities accessing their systems, that in that category it gets a little bit better again. Yeah, so most likely that's more mature organizations, which is a good news that the increased complexity is not just going downwards, but that you are able to manage complexity also with the right processes and the right tooling. Yeah? But of course, the compound effect of the external access is having a huge impact on what is happening. Now we come to my favorite, because I correlated the incidents by the governance model. And we actually see here, so the light one is no incident, and that's incidents. And you see actually that the shared model scores best. Then actually, if OT is responsible for governance, it's a little bit worse. But the worst ones are actually the ones where IT is responsible. So it's everyone in OT likes that graph. IT is always starting to argue, yeah, we are more critical in raising an issue, and it's actually just how you collect the data. But for me, the main point is actually that the shared model helps. Yeah? So that's, I think, important, because at the end, it is coming from IT systems into OT systems, and you cannot alone in your world understand what's going on and what is happening. Yeah, so you need to have an end-to-end view. And this is also something you can see directly here from the visibility. Yeah, we talked a lot about visibility, and you can also see that in the shared model, the visibility is way better than in the ones operated by OT or IT. Yeah, the IT guys can see everything in the network, but they don't understand if this is meaningful or not. And OT doesn't understand anything outside their own machine network. Yeah, so clearly a big difference in the setup. So the shared model is the way to go. Yeah, also confirmed when we go deeper from an incident perspective. Good. Then the other big topic is zero trust. So driving through the IT world for quite a while, zero trust network access, zero trust identities everywhere. So big topic. It became into OT the last years more and more that also CISOs were running zero trust initiatives for their OT networks. And so we were also really wondering, does it have an impact? So based on our questions, we categorized people into a zero trust score, 1 to 5. So this is the maturity of a zero trust rollout. So this is not self-voted. This is based on questions we ask, and we decided how mature your zero trust implementation is. The interesting part was that actually the visibility, and we know visibility is the main driver for more control and less incidents, is actually increasing heavily the more mature you are on your zero trust side. So zero trust initiatives drive actually stronger vendor sessions. Yeah, so that's pretty interesting to see. And when you break it down here, so we have the zero trust score here, and then the maturity, and then here you see the session validity, and then you see actually that on the higher levels it's relatively similar, but on the lowest score, when you haven't started to implement zero trust, it's way worse. So just starting with a zero trust initiative brings you in a good shape already. Yeah, so that's a very interesting aspect from my point of view, that some of these principles can lift you heavily. Yeah. So you can move on and you will get a lot of benefits, but from an overall oversight, a little bit of zero trust, least privileged access, always verify, that helps a lot in moving forward here. So we have now the time here. So minutes, 7 minutes, 10 minutes, 80 minutes, percent can give access in minutes. And this is interesting. We have, with a high maturity in zero trust, the speed increases heavily. Yeah, so those who struggle to give access in time are also very immature in their zero trust score. Yeah, because they need to figure out who is that person, how do we set up here, how can we connect, what is the client policy. So a lot of complexity is there. When you have systems and processes in place, you will get way better. So actually, this means that the zero trust implementation gives you a headwind in terms of speed. And this is, let's say, a surprising factor that more security gives you, in this case, more speed and not less, where many people argue that's too complex and it's slowing down my processes if I invest into another security initiative. So from that perspective, pretty good news. Of course, zero trust is not a feature you can buy. It's a discipline, it's architectural patterns, it's principles you need to implement. And at the end, they will also fail if you treat connectivity, access as a connectivity and not a control. Yeah, so when you just connect two networks with a VPN, that's the opposite of zero trust, and you can have as many initiatives as you want. The famous example is here the Varta battery factories in Germany, which had an incident, I think, 2 years ago in the Ukraine. Unfortunately, they had connected the OT networks through VPNs with each other. So as reconciliation, they had to also shut down the German and the British factories because they were all connected and they couldn't contain anything. And then you're back to zero. So at the end, you need to verify and not have connectivity, but really control the access. And then you can also contain the breaches. Good. So when you stay in this architecture of zero trust, this means you have the fragmentation in the beginning, you go to a consolidated setup, but the ultimate goal is always that you have a unified way for controlling the access patterns, because you need to make the principles always true, and you cannot have too many ways to make decisions on that one. Good. So some takeaways from that data. So first of all, how you do remote access defines more or less the overall maturity from a security perspective. You can invest as much as you want in other preventive measures when you have no visibility and multiple tools in place and let others just connect to everything you have not achieved anything. That's the maturity you have, and you might have certain threat protection and visibility, but it will be always too late. The governance is a key part. So implementing zero trust principles to have regulations like a NIS2, which defines controls, helps you to move forward. And also the zero trust itself gives you an increased maturity to move on here. And with this, I want to go a little bit in a homework for you. So, because we started here with assuming control, but the evidence, as you've seen from the report, is not that brilliant. So when you go back to your organization, so where do you believe you have control? And where you actually see a proof for that? So where is the evidence that this is control and not just connectivity? So that's the key question to talk to your team and have a look in when you're back tomorrow or next week, depending on how long you want to stay here on this wonderful event. But in case you find something, the key part is you need to start measuring evidence and not just put yourself into maturity buckets of certain frameworks. We have implemented 90% of NIS2 controls. Doesn't say anything. Measure it. What's going on? What is the evidence? Does someone have access or not? Take the remote access in your OT environment into the risk management. It is the main driver. You cannot ignore it. It's most of attacks coming through this. You need to clarify the ownership. Shared ownership is nice, but what does it really mean? Break it down into the sub areas. Who owns which tool? Who owns which access? Who is stand-in for approvals? Who else might have access? Who has a shadow system? This needs to be all clarified and written down. And then start seeing remote access as a control and not as a connectivity. Because this is where it starts. Good. So that's my big ask to you. You have the little flyer on your chair, so you can download the full report. You will find a few more examples.